we're looking at our current empire, looking at our current situation. Are we suffering from the same thing? Is it a thing where empires have to fall from within to fall from without? It's like, are we at a stage where our inability to get along, our inability to, stamp out corruption, our kind of like the disparaging gap and ever-growing gap of wealth distribution of these people being so rich that they kind of like oppress the poor in like just through influence and making decisions and think they can rule the poor through just like, I know what's good for you. Yeah. Is that kind of mentality, is that what's actually going to crumble our empire from within?
I mean, look, history has shown time and time again that nothing is written in stone, right? Sulla came in and Sulla left suddenly. Like Sulla came in, killed everyone, declared himself dictator, and then he left, which no one could have predicted. Caesar came in, won everything against everyone, held all the powers, and then got shanked by like his best friends and his son. Then Augustus and Mark Antony come in, and Augustus, Octavian, was like an 18-year-old kid with no influence, and Mark Antony was an experienced general with all kinds of influence and power and money, and Octavian won. So I guess I just want to first of all kind of like put into question, okay, people talk about our decline or rotting from the inside, and yes, there's so many issues that we're currently facing, issues that are getting worse. That doesn't have to put us on a path of constant decline, though, or on a rot, or like, us crumbling from the inside and then falling from the outside. A lot of people like to think that way, but actually, there's no such thing as a predetermined fate. At least when it comes to statecraft, right? I mean, maybe you might want to believe in that on a spiritual level, but look at history and look at how many left turns things have taken.
Absolutely.
And it's very easy to nowadays look back and think, oh, of course, everything turned out the way it did because, of course, we have all this evidence and all this stuff. But that is reading history backwards, essentially. What these issues that we're facing should do, what the ideal case would be, is that they wake up enough people to stop just relying on some faceless politician to somehow fix all the issues for you, but for you to actually go out on the street and do something.
Absolutely.
Right? And you can do something. It doesn't have to be sitting in bed scrolling on TikTok or weaponized revolution storming your government buildings, right? There is a middle ground there, which you can engage in right now without doing anything like illegal or harmful or whatever. You can organize, you can try to create new institutions. And I don't think that are like rotting from the inside or crumbling from the inside. I don't think that's predetermined. Equally, though, I mean, if you want to see the parallels between ancient Rome and now, they are absolutely there. And for as long as democracy exists, there will always be these types of issues popping up. At least until we find like some other really amazing system of governance that somehow combines freedom and democracy and equality with like absolute stability. But I guess my point is that things aren't hopeless.
I agree. 3, 2, 1. Hello. Welcome to another episode of the Jeoffrey Sarpong podcast. Today I'm back again with Dan. Dan, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for having me again. I'm very glad to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm a bit tired. I feel like I'm always tired doing these episodes, but I think that's when I work at my best. I've got my Red Bull, my drink, and it's going to be a great conversation.
I should have gotten a Red Bull as well, man. I'm also like, when you work and then all day, and then you're like sitting there and you have to talk about the Roman Republic. Like, actually, I could use some caffeine and like a lot of sugar.
But you know what? I think like that's the best condition to talk about the Roman Republic. True. Tired, just like seeing how the system works, and you're like, man,
sitting in your armchairs,
literally,
like, back in the day,
back in the Roman Republic, they didn't have to worry about that. But anyway, let's set it up properly. Right. So yes, as you mentioned, we were here today to speak about the Roman Republic. The last time we spoke, we talked about like history, and I love the fact that we talked about war and how the war back then and the modern parallels that we had, and I really enjoyed that. So we're back again today to talk about how empires fall. I love that conversation. I love that topic because it kind of reminds me how these things that we have, these systems, they're not going to last. Like we've seen the Roman Republic and how that grew to become the biggest republic ever, and then it fell. So I find it fascinating to talk to people about how the systems are failing, and just so we're aware of that.
Yeah.
You know, and like, you know, to start with Rome, Rome at its peak was the kind of epitome of what an empire should be. It's democracy, it's armies, it's structure, it's all of that. And even that fell. So I think that's why I've been fascinated to speak to you. I know we used to often talk about stuff like this.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to have the conversation today.
Yeah, no, I'm excited too. And it's like you say, like the fall of a republic and the fall of a democracy, which has happened before in history, obviously. But like the scale at which it happened in Rome, and like the well-documented style of history telling that we have from that time, it really makes it special. So it's a really fascinating time to discuss.
Yeah, 100%. And I think let's start with understanding like definitions and stuff like that. So with the Roman Republic, can you speak to me a little bit more about what that was meant to be, what that was presented as, and what the Republic and kind of like its democracy was for the people back then?
Yeah, I mean, that pretty much ties into the founding of the Roman Republic and the story that is attached to how the Republic formed and how the Romans saw it ultimately. Because all of you might know that Rome didn't start out as a democracy, they didn't start out as a republic, they started out as a monarchy. The first king of Rome was Romulus, the founder of Rome. Famous story with him killing his brother and then founding the city, essentially. He was also supposed to be the son of Mars, so the Roman god of war. And that's kind of the style in which Rome was founded. So already kind of like a very bloody, aggressive, expansionist kind of way in which Rome perceives itself. So that's kind of like the self-image of the Romans. Then we have 5 more kings after Romulus. All of them seem to be pretty good at it. All of them are, you know, either great warriors, great leaders and strategists, or they're great spiritual leaders, great, you know, lawmakers and people who are establishing traditions and who are kind of like establishing peace. And that was kind of a good rhythm for the early Roman monarchy, I guess. But then we come to the 7th king, who is Tarquinius Superbus. And that's a great name. We're going to encounter a lot of great names today. But Tarquinius Superbus is especially great because his surname, Superbus, means proud. It means proud. And proud not in a good way, but in a way of like being excessively proud. I guess vainglory might be a good term for it as well. Or like someone who just thinks themselves to be the best and the greatest and can't do no wrong, even though they might be very flawed themselves. So Tarquinius Superbus was the 7th king of Rome. Allegedly got into power through like a coup, and then essentially was just a tyrant. So like he killed anyone who was potentially dangerous to him. He did a bunch of stuff that like, you know, oppressed the Roman people, took a bunch of freedoms away, was apparently just a very morally morose person. And the Roman populace suffered. And, you know, there was malcontent growing, but people were scared because this guy, he would kill even someone who was like, you know, even if they didn't say anything against him, if he felt like this person is powerful enough or rich enough or smart enough, then I'm just going to kill him. So this is where we come finally to the founder of the Roman Republic, who I feel like exemplifies what the Republic was supposed to be. Maybe not in his early life, but once we get to like his actual great deeds, then we will learn more. But like in his early life, actually, he survived this Roman oppression because he pretended to be stupid. So he pretended to be kind of like not very mentally there. He pretended to be kind of very simple so that he wouldn't be perceived as a threat. He still managed to have a family and have children, but he had this kind of public farce going on. And that's what his name Brutus, I think, is supposed to mean as well. Like Brutus is supposed to mean like kind of like dull or slightly dumb. All of this is to say that everything was kind of going downhill. People were very scared. And then things started to boil over when the son of Tarquinius Superbus, so the son of the king, a woman. I think that woman's name was Lucretia. And Lucretia was a young daughter of a patrician family. So the patricians in Rome, those are kind of like the noble families, like the very wealthy ones, by the son of the king. And then she killed herself, more or less publicly, out of this trauma, essentially, and announced it to the world what happened, and then killed herself with a dagger. And this was the moment when everything boiled over. Like the Roman people, they were kind of like, you know, all this way, they were like, okay, you know, he's killing his enemies, he's doing this, he's doing that. And like, this is what they could, I guess, still abide by. But when it came then to kind of like this really morally wrong thing that he's done to like this completely innocent person, this completely innocent woman, and that led then to her suicide, like the cutting short of this young life that was still blooming. This was when the Roman people rose up. And I guess this tells you one thing about what the Romans perceive themselves at their character, that they don't want to suffer these kind of moral injustices. When it comes to other stuff like power plays and wars and whatever, that might be more understandable. But when it comes to just, doing evil for evil's sake, or like for just to want to somehow satisfy yourself to like do something so morally abhorrent as like this is when the Romans were like, you know what, stop. And Brutus finally stopped pretending to be stupid. He also kind of like was like, okay, this is a line, and we're gonna have to rise up. So he led the uprising together with the patrician family whose daughter killed herself. And they overthrew the king. They exiled the king and his family and his followers. And this is when they started to instate a republic. And, things were specifically built in a way that, there's a balance of powers. There is a balance so that no one can be too powerful within the state. There's 2 consuls. There's the Senate made up of patricians. There are the different assemblies which vote on laws and vote for the different officials. And it was specifically made so that a king like Tarquinius, someone who is morally just abhorrent and who can just abuse this power, so that a king like this can never come back again. And this was another founding idea, I guess. So this balance of power, something we still see today quite a bit, being talked about and being taken very seriously. And also, of course, like the rule of law, that like you can't just rape someone and get away with it, even if you're a king. Those were the very foundational ideas of Rome. However, the story goes on, and in that story you learn a little more about like what the Republic was meant to be, because this king actually comes back. Tarquinius Superbus comes back, tries to reinstate himself, and initially he tries to do it via a coup, so he tries to recruit people within the city of Rome to let him back in and support him in power. And this coup gets discovered, and Brutus discovered that 2 of his sons were among the conspirators trying to bring back the old king. And the story goes that Brutus himself declared that they should be executed and presided himself over their execution. And it is said that he was completely stoic during the whole ordeal. He was just stone-faced, cold, didn't show any emotion. Even when they died, he didn't say anything, he didn't do anything. And kind of like executed his duty to the fullest degree. Later on at their funeral, it is said that he cried and pulled out his hair and tore open his clothes. So he was obviously very distraught. But the important things are in the story is that he executed like his duty as a Roman citizen and as a Roman consul. He executed that before even his duty as a father. So he took that more seriously than a father who might want his children to live and to be happy and healthy.
He put the idea of Rome and the Republic ahead of his own.
Exactly.
On that point, actually, I think first of all, thank you. That was amazing. Like actually the backstory and history is
one of my favorite stories. Actually,
I just heard it for the first time, and that's like really impressive. On that point about the ideals that held together the Republic.
Yeah.
When Brutus took over, they must have got together and said, these are what we stand by. Obviously, the insurrection started because of this action that happened. So there must have been a kind of understanding amongst them that we actually stand for this. We stand for freedom. We stand for civic duty. We stand for... Talk to me more about that. What were some of the ideals that Rome itself kind of declared, or the Republic declared that it stood for once it became what it was?
That's a very good question. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about Rome is that they tie kind of like the moral purpose and like what they stand for very much to religious purpose as well. So this is something we see much later in literature, in the Roman literature, for example, in the Aeneid, which is kind of like this massive Roman epic in the style of the Iliad and the Odyssey, about Aeneas, who was the founder of a city that was kind of like the father or mother city of Rome, I guess. Or I guess like it's even like two cities removed. So from the city sprung another city, and from that other city sprung Rome, I guess. But the purpose of Rome and like the kind of values that it stood for, at least at that point, was very much tied to, okay, divine purpose. The gods declared that Rome is special. It's that city on a hill. You see that a lot. I mean, like this term "city on a hill," like it's
biblical too. I know that it can't it's also referred to in the Bible, but keep going.
Yeah, exactly. So like this is something that came kind of like with Rome, and that was somewhat special about Roman history as well, because I can't think of many other states, many other empires at that time and beforehand who thought themselves to be kind of like imbued with this divinity. And I mean, it starts already with Romulus, who comes from Mars, obviously. Like Rome ties itself very closely to its gods. Really the only other state I can think of like beforehand that really wanted this divine purpose was the Persian Empire, where the king was said to have like this divine connection to the greatest deity in their religion. So yeah, I guess this kind of like divine purpose is something that even the Republic tied itself to. Then obviously the Empire much more. But when it comes to the values of like freedom and equality, they espoused actually less of these values specifically than they espoused values like stoicism or like emotional control and sacrifice. Actually, that was a very big one. So even though I'm sure words like freedom and words like democracy meant a lot to them, to Romans, as far as I can tell from like their literature, it was much more about civic duty. It was much more about, I'm going to sacrifice everything to the state. I'm going to sacrifice myself and my well-being for the well-being of others, which, you know, you might say is a democratic idea. Like if you feel that your state represents every single one of your neighbors, every single one of your people, then you can definitely say, okay, me sacrificing myself for that is me sacrificing myself for my fellow people.
Yes.
My, you know, like the democratic structure of my state.
It's almost like a true idea of democracy. I mean, nowadays we look at it, probably it's kind of like the idea that communist countries would espouse, like we're actually not an individual, we're part of a collective, and to work for the collective is actually what will instill the individual some purpose or some sort of like, you know, safety, because if the hive mind is actually well, then the individual self doesn't really matter as much.
Exactly.
I think though that it's fascinating to see how it kind of develops, or how it kind of erodes over time, that ideal.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm fascinated by too. Let's get into kind of the democracy, because to give it more of an overview, what I'm really focused on, what I'm really interested in is how these ideals like Rome over time erode, and the symptoms of that erosion, where that comes from. You know, we've mentioned a little bit about these individuals, you know, and then later we're going to talk about how people like Caesar and how these Augustus, how they were a symptom of the ideals that the civil duty will have, and having that kind of idea against that, or maybe for that, and how that relates to what we have today. You know, we've talked about it before about how wealth is kind of seen today as that kind of like media between the influences people have and the responsibility they have. The people actually on the top have so much wealth, have so much influence, that the idea of democracy isn't really being implemented as well. And I think there was the same thing with kind of Rome. So going back to Rome a little bit, and you just kind of keep going what you were speaking about. What was their idea of democracy? How was it structured? You know, they had a Senate, you mentioned, they had a consul, and they had like the people, how the people voted for it. Speak more about those kind of three structures and how kind of the interplay between that.
So I kind of love this question, because we often talk about like the Roman Republic like we would of a modern republic, like a modern democracy, you know, like universal suffrage and you know, everyone votes and every vote counts equally and all that kind of stuff, and like, you know, oh, no bribery and no gifts or whatever, you know. And a lot of this really wasn't the case for the Romans. This was a very, I mean, we have to remember, it was a very early attempt at like a republic. I mean, really, like, as a republic, it was the first republic. The first republic in the world, res publica, comes from the Roman, comes from Latin, means the public matter, the public thing. So this was the first kind of like attempt of them to mix different constitutional types and bring them together. How well they did it is contended. But, okay, so let me explain how they structured it first, so you can kind of like get an inkling. So they had 3 assemblies which voted on a lot of different things. So the first assembly was I believe it was the Comitia Centuriata. So it was the Assembly of Centuries. And this assembly voted for the consuls. The consuls are like the highest office in Rome. It's kind of like equivalent to a president nowadays. There were always 2 consuls though, and they could like veto each other. They were also the ones in wartime who would take like ultimate control over the military. They could propose laws, etc. And they were like kind of the executive branch, I guess. So the Assembly of Centuries voted for the consuls. The Assembly of Centuries also voted for like any major decisions like war and peace, also voted on like, I mean, I read somewhere someone said like major constitutional changes. Rome itself didn't really have like a constitution per se, like they didn't have something written down. It's very much like England kind of in a way.
Just make it up as you go.
Yeah, you have traditions and you keep yourself to these traditions, but and there's obviously laws and stuff, but there wasn't like a constitution. But I guess any really big major change would have been voted on in the Assembly of Centuries. Now the funny part is, it wasn't really a democratic assembly in the sense that we would take it nowadays, because the amount of votes you had were based on your property. So how much you owned, how wealthy you were. So there were, I think, like 6 or 7 classes. The first class, so the high value, large property owners, they had 80 votes. Then the next class, which I think was the equites, like the knight class of Rome, they had 18 votes.
Oh my God.
And then lower and lower and lower. And then when you finally get to the people without property, who was the majority, those were that was the biggest demographic in Rome, right? They had 1 vote. Altogether 1 vote. So overall it was, I think, 194 votes, or 193 votes. 80 of which went to the smallest demographic with the highest wealth. And one of these 193 votes went to the largest demographic. And actually, funnily enough, I mean, not funnily enough, actually rather tragically, those lower classes often didn't get to vote at all, because the vote was called off once it reached like a majority, like once I guess 97 votes are cast for a certain consul or a certain decision, then they would stop. So like the lower classes who would vote last wouldn't get to vote at all in most cases.
That's so fascinating. That is so fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's go deep into that idea then, because I'm fascinated by the idea that, first of all, you mentioned about how even our perception of the Republic isn't what was kept up even back then.
Yeah.
You know, so I've read Plato's Republic, and I've kind of like, you know, the idea of kind of
Very
like,
impressive.
well, read some of it. Let's say everyone's read some of it. No one can say he's read the whole thing. But I've read from what I understood about it, the ideal of what the state and what it should be is there, and even there it talks about all the ways that it could, you know, fall down and, you know, not live up to the expectation. Yeah. And you mentioned about how even Rome, even when they were trying to implement that, don't really live up to that, and the kind of democratic process that we think is, you know, we fall short of. Even they did too. Yeah. So the question I had in me when you said that was that, then is there a thing where it's like an almost a thing you're always reaching for, this idea of like pure democracy, or you'll never really have a pure democracy because the way the systems are set up, even in Rome, the people with the most property will have the most votes. In here, people with the most influence will have the most votes. Yeah. If you get into parliament, you have to have some sort of money or some sort of like idea of wealth or connections to get in. So there is a gatekeeping implicit in the idea, which makes it not fully democratic. Is it a thing where it will always be that, or do you think a truly democratic state can be reached?
I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head with this conflict between what a state is on paper, like what all our democratic institutions are and what they're supposed to do, and then what it actually is, what the people are actually going through, and whether the problems that people face can actually be addressed by the institutions that have been built, right? And the Romans faced that problem over and over again, and it was actually a large contributor to the collapse of the Republic. So I guess to kind of like, first of all, set the framework a little more about like how the Romans tried to address, you know, different issues, how they tried to anticipate those issues in their structures. So obviously we know that the system of like wealth-based voting it's pretty unfair. You know, like if the richest have all the votes, then obviously the
If
poorest
you don't get to vote, that's pretty hilarious. Imagine waiting in the queue. It's like, oh guys, go home. It's fine.
They're gonna get screwed over pretty much all the time. But luckily, I guess, or at least like you have to give the Romans some credit. They tried to anticipate this issue, so they set up 2 more assemblies, right? One assembly was just for the lower classes. I think it was called the...
I think the People's Assembly.
The People's Assembly. I was just trying to think of like the Roman. I think it was like the Concilium Plebis.
Yeah.
And only lower class citizens could vote there. So no patricians, no very wealthy people. Only lower class citizens could vote there. And that assembly had the right to pass laws. So they couldn't vote for consuls. They couldn't vote for like offices. But they could pass votes. They could pass laws. And actually, sorry, I was wrong there. They could vote for one office, which was the tribune. And the tribune was meant to be the representative of the lower class people. That was specifically an office designed to offset this other assembly, which was just based on wealth and power and whatever. This tribune was meant to be a representative and was meant to stick up for those people. So
was it just one tribune?
There were multiple tribunes at one time.
So is it like an MP, what we have here, where you can vote an MP of your kind of area? So in England, how it works is that you can, if you campaign as an individual for, say, let's say Uxbridge or let's say this area, right? We can vote you into Parliament, and you will now represent us as an area in Parliament.
I guess yes. I mean, partially as like a representative. Yes, exactly. Like as opposed to an MP who would kind of like be a geographical representative, like this place has voted for this guy. A tribune was meant to represent a class, like a social class. And I believe patricians and noble people, they couldn't be voted as tribunes as well, so a tribune had to be for the people.
Of the people, for the people, by the people.
There's actually a super interesting story that happens in the late Republic, which kind of exemplifies how this office too got twisted and how it got abused. But just to kind of get back on topic, so yes, he was a representative, but also a little different than an MP. Because a tribune had a lot more power, actually, than an MP. For one, a tribune was completely immune to any judicial persecution. So he had immunity from the law. As long as he was in office, which was just for 1 year, a tribune couldn't be persecuted for whatever he did. The other power was that, just like a consul, a tribune could introduce laws. So a tribune could propose a law to the People's Assembly, and have that be passed into law. And that's essentially how the lower class citizens could completely circumvent like the consuls and the rich people and whatever. So this was essentially the Romans' attempt to like balance inequality, because even the Romans didn't want at least the early Romans, didn't want their fellow citizens to live in squalor and in poverty. And they knew that this would probably cause a lot of instability if like some people had nothing and a few people had a lot. So that was their attempt, right? However, this kind of, like everything else, eroded as well later on in the Republic. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
You're answering my question. You're leading into the next question, so keep going. Finish up this point.
This is a fantastic story. You're going to love this. So later on in the Republic, the people, like the people in charge, the powerful people, the rich people, they realized how much power a tribune actually has. And they started to kind of like abuse that. They started to kind of like try to put in their own people, put in people who are sympathetic to their cause into tribune positions. And this kind of reached like a high point with a guy named Clodius Pulcher, who is just like the most entertaining guy in Roman history ever. So Clodius Pulcher was a patrician, so a nobleman, very wealthy, apparently very handsome. Pulcher means like handsome, I guess. And his first claim to fame was something called the Bona Dea incident, which was essentially, so Julius Caesar had a big sacred event at his house. Like he had at his house like an event to like praise the gods where only women were allowed. So it was like a sacred kind of like, you know. And this guy Clodius Pulcher, dressed up as a woman, snuck into Julius Caesar's house and apparently screwed Julius Caesar's wife at that event. And he got caught. He got put in front of a jury. He got put in front of he got persecuted. Everybody was outraged. Everybody was like, "What are you doing, man? Like, what is like? First of all, dressing up as a woman, which like Romans feel is like, oh, that's already terrible. But then you sleep with another man's wife at a holy festival, in like a sacred."
It's Julius Caesar.
Julius
The guys
Caesar.
will be heads kidnapped. Yeah, anyway, keep going.
Exactly. So like, this dude already off to a good start. Makes himself a bunch of enemies just through that alone, namely Cicero, who absolutely hates this guy. Like Cicero stands for Republican values and like, being like morally upright. This guy, Clodius Pulcher, obviously stands for everything Cicero despises, so Cicero actually testifies against him in the court case and makes himself pretty much an enemy for life in Clodius Pulcher. Because, Cicero like had a bunch of troubles like during his consulship. There was the Catalonian conspiracy in 63 BC, where a guy named Catiline, he tried to overthrow the republic and tried to kind of like instate himself, and Cicero stopped it. Cicero managed to like uncover it. Then he captured Catiline, and he deliberated about what he was supposed to do, and ultimately he was partially pushed, partially he took the decision himself to execute Catiline on the spot, essentially, without a trial, without anything, because he just wanted to be done with this instability, with these conspirators. So Clodius Pulcher, a few years later, is like, okay, you know what? I'm going to get Cicero back for what he did to me at the trial. So I'm going to let myself be voted in as tribune. Now, an issue number one is that Clodius Pulcher is a very wealthy man from a very wealthy family, so he would be disqualified. So what he does is he denounces his aristocratic title. He lets himself be adopted by a poor family so that he can now claim to be a plebeian and lets himself voted in as tribune. Right? The first thing
Goes undercover amongst the poor.
The first thing he does is he passes a law that retroactively makes the execution of Catiline illegal. Which
So now Cicero is now...
Cicero is now a criminal. Cicero gets exiled for this. His house... I mean, the thing is, when you get exiled, I'm not quite sure what happens, but like obviously you're no longer in your house and you can't hold property. So Clodius Pulcher essentially dismantles, tears his house apart piece by piece, and builds a sacred shrine upon the property to make it impossible for Cicero
to
rebuild his house and reclaim his property when he comes back from exile.
That's a level of dedication and like bitterness and like
A level of pettiness.
pettiness
Yeah,
that I've never understood before.
Pure pettiness. And I mean, the guy, he's just a pure populist as well. Like he proposes a bunch of laws that like controlled grain prices or whatever, which I mean, is something we can relate to right now. Like controlled food prices.
Yeah.
Which were very popular with the poor in Rome, with the poor people in Rome. So this is an example of a man who could kind of like get his personal vendetta satisfied and just like be an all-around terrible bloke under the guise of serving for the people. And that's an example of like offices like this and like mechanisms which are meant to like protect the poor, ensure stability in Rome, can be abused later on. Yeah.
First off, that's an incredible story. I need to learn more about this guy. That's hilarious. He actually got himself adopted. It just shows all these systems, man. They're just there for show. Okay, but you mentioned Julius Caesar, and I want to talk about that too, because I think my next point was to talk about how even with these systems, right, even building these systems and having the best of intentions, they can be corroded by individuals.
Yeah.
Now let's focus on individuals that kind of show how these systems flow.
Yeah.
They show how these systems don't really match up. So with Julius Caesar, talk to me about his rise. Talk to me about a little bit about him. You don't have to go into his whole history, but talk to me about how he shows the instability in the system, especially maybe you could start by when he crosses the Rubicon River.
Yeah.
And then like just shows that like makes that decision, his troops have to make the decision between are you with me or are you against me? And that splitting of the Republic kind of is the first kind of like chip in the armor of like these ideas that you have.
Yeah.
They don't really work in the reality of the cold, fresh of air.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, how do you upstill that when someone like Julius Caesar is coming after you and all the thing that you love?
I mean, I'm going to have to rug pull you a little bit there, because I would say if you want to look at how a single person can erode power and can like, you know, like how this can be possible that soldiers choose a single man over the state that nourished them and raised them. You have to go even further back than the Rubicon crossing, because at that point it was already too late, man. Like at that point the soldiers were already like, yeah, let's do it.
He's our guy.
I mean, the thing is, when it really started, like the erosion of the Republic and the possibility for someone like Caesar to exploit it, was with the Marian reforms in, I think, 106 BC. So quite a few years before Caesar ever came onto the scene. So the Marian reforms, essentially, they were introduced by a guy named Marius while he was a consul. Marius was also a general and like a military man, like most kind of politicians were in Rome. And essentially, his reforms were meant to address a declining state of the Roman military. So the Roman military up to this point was very much like, you would go to the military if you had property, if you were like a farmer, if you were somewhat wealthier than the landless poor, the masses. And you would go to the military as like a form of civil duty, of service. You would provide your own gear. You would buy your own gear. And usually it would be very short campaigns, so you could just come back to your property and man your farms and grow some crops and whatever. So it was just like this, like the ancient Greeks, kind of like it was just a civic service that you had to do, and it was a point of honor, a point to kind of like protect your community, but it wasn't anything beyond that. It wasn't like a profession of soldiering, right? The thing is, this went well up until the Roman Empire started to expand and expand. They had more campaigns in foreign lands, military campaigns, that would take longer. And if you were a farmer, you had crops to take care of or whatever, you couldn't be away that long. And the military didn't pay very well in Rome as well, so it wasn't necessarily something that was like economically feasible if it took a toll on like your actual day job. So the military numbers dwindled. The Roman military wasn't able to like keep up with the demand of conflicts that they were having. So Marius was like, okay, you know what? Up till now, the poor, like the propertyless classes, again, the majority of people, they were forbidden from joining the military. Now let's make it legal. And he didn't only make it legal, which allowed them to get a salary and whatever and have like a stable job, I guess. He also introduced the fact that Rome would provide military gear for its soldiers. So like a modern military, essentially. You wouldn't buy your own armor and you wouldn't buy your own gear. No, the state would provide for you. The state would train you, the state would keep you in barracks, and it would give you armors and weapons, etc., which was a fairly modern idea. It was a very new idea at the time. So this led to Rome developing this kind of standing professional army where you would have soldiers who would serve for years and years and years and years, because this was now their day job and this was how they would, just conduct their whole life. Now, the thing is where it gets really difficult. The reason why this was the turning point for the Roman Republic was for two main points. The first point was that the military still didn't pay very well. The salaries weren't very high, and even if you were a propertyless poor, sure, you got food now and you got like a salary, but it wasn't very much, and you weren't like rising up through the ranks a lot, and it wasn't something to sustain yourself or a family on. So the soldiers would actually have to rely a lot on booty and plundering to get more money in, to get more income in. And like, especially when you're on a foreign campaign and you're somewhere in Central Asia, right? You're not going to have very good supply lines. So like your pay, your supplies, your food might not even arrive.
Absolutely.
So like you were alone out there, and the only guy who was responsible for feeding you and paying you was your general. The one guy at the top of your army who would tell you, all right, your pay is down, like you guys are not getting paid, you guys aren't getting any food, let's raid a village. Let's raid a town, let's plunder some stuff, and let's distribute it equally among each other. So that essentially the state stopped being the sponsor of these soldiers, but rather the generals themselves who would kind of like come up with methods to like pay their soldiers. Which first of all shifted again the loyalty, I guess, from the soldier from the state to the guy who's actually paying their bills. The second thing that really toppled the entire Roman system was something that Marius did, I would say, out of good intentions, because when he came back from a campaign, like in 102 or 101, I don't know, he really wanted his soldiers, and especially the soldiers who were poor without property, he wanted them to be taken care of. So he wanted them to get a piece of land from the Roman state, because he was like, look, all of these soldiers, they joined me on a campaign, they're loyal, they're good soldiers, they're good Romans, yet they have nothing. And when they come back to Rome, they will just disappear into the crowd. I mean, the living circumstances were also miserable if you didn't have any property in Rome. If you lived in Rome and you were poor, you would likely live in a slum that was built of like little wooden huts. And every other year or so, the Tiber, the river in Rome, would swell, and those little settlements, those little slums, they would be wiped out because there would be a flood, and then all these wooden shacks would just be flushed away. So essentially, living in Rome as a poor citizen, you would literally be like today we wouldn't like. Today it would be equivalent to like a homeless person essentially on the street, or an unhoused person, I guess is what you would say. Like, because they didn't have a stable home, they didn't have a stable income. There would be hand-in-the-mouth living essentially. Like they would have like day jobs. So Marius didn't want his soldiers to go back to this. So he started lobbying the Senate to like give land to his soldiers, and he started to really gain traction, I guess, gain popularity. Finally, the Senate actually said no. But Marius went to a tribune, like we just said, like tribune circumventing the rich people. And the tribune passed a law to give Marius soldiers land. And Marius, like, the thing is, this is very good-hearted of him. I can see it. Like, there were good intentions in there. But this is really where things started to go downhill really, really quickly, because it came now a demand from every single soldier and every single army to be like, yeah, look, I'm propertyless. Why don't you, general, get me some land when I come back? And like, like the generals, they were like, if they could promise their soldiers something like this, they would have their loyalty until death. Like those soldiers would march anywhere for them, because like it wasn't just pay and plunder and booty that the general would then give them. The general would give them a future. Like if you had land in Rome, you were someone.
Your life would be changed, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You had a voice in the Assembly of Centuries. You could vote. Your vote would count more. And, you would raise your children in more wealth, and you wouldn't matter. So like, this is really the turning point where soldiers started to stop trusting the state that wasn't taking care of them very well, and started trusting the generals who were taking care of them quite well, actually.
That's so fascinating. That is so fascinating. And you see like these things, like you said, good intentions, and like who knows what was the right thing to do. Maybe in that time he needed to do that because all this whole thousands of people in the army that were actually expanding the empire, they kind of deserve something from it. If they're like making this idea of Rome.
And I mean, arguably no one deserves to live in the circumstances that a propertyless citizen in Rome would have lived in.
Absolutely. And so when it comes to that turn, I think the reason I was fascinated by that kind of like crossing the Rubicon River moment was because I think maybe just has been depicted in like, shows, and the idea of it was like that turning point, that moment where all of those seeds would finally come home to, roost. Almost like,
exactly.
It's like now you make this decision, where does your loyalty lie? And like we spoke before at the beginning about how the idea of Roman Republic was that we are for the people. We don't really matter. It's about more your civic duty, your responsibility to the idea of Rome. And that kind of being split, and even the idea, right? Let's even go into it deeper, right? Even the idea of like someone like Julius Caesar choosing to do, I'm actually going to come in and invade. He must be in his head thinking, I'm actually doing something for the idea of Rome. You guys are corrupt, and you're doing, your system is, I'm actually going to do this.
I don't know. I mean,
let's talk about it. Do you think Julius Caesar did it because he had good intentions, or do you think he was exploiting a broken system?
I mean, that's the $1,000,000 question. Because, Julius Caesar, most sources that we have on him were written by himself.
A little bit biased.
So that's a little bit of bias there, you could say,
The best of intentions.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm just a regular old dude,
just trying to help out,
red-blooded Roman drinking beer on my porch, all that stuff. Like, he's a very, very effective writer, very effective kind of like propagandist for himself. So
absolutely.
I don't know if he had good intentions or not. I don't know if he was just out for himself. I mean, he did crown himself dictator for life, so I don't know, maybe that says something about him. The thing is, with Julius Caesar, what makes him interesting is that before he was a military leader, he was also a politician, and he spoke in the Senate, and we have some records of him in like debates, and the Catalan conspiracy as well. And he obviously knew all these people quite well around him, knew all these people who served in the Republic. I don't know if he was some kind of psychopath who just thought of everyone around him as a piece of meat, or if he was like, yeah, those are my friends, and like even though I want don't know, even though I want to cross the Rubicon and like topple the Republic, I guess, maybe I don't want to kill everyone. Maybe power isn't everything to me. I don't know. What we do know is that he chose clemency when he got into power, so he pardoned, I guess, everyone and chose not to kill anyone. Which got him killed.
What do we think? Because I know we spoke about this too, right? About how the idea of like him not killing his enemies actually came back to haunt him because they literally stabbed him in the back, and how his predecessor, or like
Sulla, yes,
learned, and I think that if that idea of like having that much power and having to make those choices and those decisions, even if I guess it depends on the environment that you are, right? Even if you have the intentions of these are my friends, I've known you, I'm not dealing with you. I'm just doing this for political reasons. And then you get stabbed in the back for it. It was actually the better thing to actually kill everyone and get it over and done with, like you've mentioned. What do you think?
I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, I mean, look, just because we're Gresham College related as well, but the Melissa Lane, Professor Melissa Lane spoke once about this when she talked about Machiavelli and Nietzsche. If you kill everyone to gain power, like, will you automatically have to become a tyrant, or can you maybe do something good out of like this terrible harm that you're doing? The thing is, with Caesar, like undoubtedly Caesar just thought he could just get away with it, and that he was just so smart and powerful and so like charismatic that
would you want to kill me?
No one's gonna kill him, and like especially not like his adopted son. Who's gonna kill him? The thing is, if we look at other examples, if we look at Sulla before Caesar and Augustus after Caesar, those people killed quite a few people when they were in power, and they had much more successful runs than Caesar. Sulla is interesting because he kind of like goes into what you were asking. Like Sulla killed quite a lot of political enemies. He killed quite a lot of senators. And then he claimed that he had saved the Republic and he retired. So Sulla didn't even want to be a dictator for life. Sulla just I guess, really thought that he was doing something really great and that he was saving the Republic by killing all these people. Now, obviously, that was like in the 80s or 90s BC. And he didn't save the Republic. In fact, things got much, much worse. But like at the very least, if you go in and kill everyone to seize power, it'll ensure that you will be fine personally. Like your personal security will be protected because no one's left to pursue you. Like so I guess I don't know. Like when Augustus and Octavian at the time, Mark Antony killed everyone. They were also fine. The only threat to them was then just the other person. So. I don't know if killing everyone who kind of like opposes you, if you can then actually build something that is still democratic and that has still value. I don't know if it possibly, like, if you grab power and kill everyone who opposes you, if that locks you into a path of tyranny and you just have to keep killing people and putting people down. I mean, after all, Augustus, when he got in power, he also had to beat down another coup at some point against him, another conspiracy that was trying to assassinate him. Because I guess that's just how your life then goes. You always have to look over your shoulder.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, wait, did I answer your question?
You did, and I think the idea was when you were speaking, I'm thinking about it now, it's like, because imagine we take that idea and bring it to today. Yeah. Imagine there was some president out there, he became president because he killed everyone. Yeah. There's always the parliament, you got there, everyone was dead. Yeah. And he's now the dictator. You might say some Russian president might be doing that behind the scenes. But like the idea that's how you start, even if you have the best of intentions, we know where you're willing to go. Yeah. We know what you're willing to do for that power. Yeah. And I think that kind of puts fear in people, and that fear kind of permeates. And you can create whatever house of cards you want on top of it, but it will come crumbling down because like the people will have fear, or like the people that are coming after you will have this idea that, I have to make sure that I say the best thing, or and you don't instill love or, whatever, if that's how societies are built from the ground up. Yeah. You don't instill people looking after each other, because it feels like any, dissension will be put down. Yeah. Even if that's not the case, even if you just still by people, I have to get rid of them to actually start this 1,000 years of peace, whatever. It's very, very difficult for that to happen. I think for me, it makes me question how how, especially in democracies, let's go back to that a little bit and bring up Augustus or Octavian, whichever one you want to call it.
Sorry, for anyone who isn't familiar, so Augustus was the first emperor of Rome, but before he became emperor, his name was Octavian. So yeah, that's the person we're referring to.
Absolutely. He was the adopted son of Julius Caesar, so that adds a whole other thing to this conversation. Yeah. But yeah, so him, for example, when he comes, like you said, he comes to power, kills all his oppositions, starts this kind of like idea, very, very good speaker, very, very good like propagandist, starts this idea of like, we are now okay, everything's gonna be okay, I'm gonna steady the ship. And now he has this idea, like he preaches this idea of like the republic is still there, there's a Senate, but everyone knows he's the one that runs it because and Mark Antony kind of like destroyed everything. So it gets me thinking about how power will also disguise itself in order to placate the masses. You know, and I think that's to link it to what we have now. So I want to make that jump too. How like people at power, people on top of the massive amount of power, if they know, okay, like if I just present myself as a democracy, it's actually better. I would actually have less likely people to try to bring me down because they think I'm a tyrant. You know, what does that say about how power can like disguise itself in democracies and actually maybe hurt it in the long term? Yeah,
I mean, I guess one of the points you brought up that I think really neatly fits into this theme is that you reap what you sow. You know, like if you go and kill everyone and you place yourself on top of it, then that's the society you create, and that will always reflect back at you. That will reflect at any future leader who might come in. So, for example, we just talked about like, oh, you know, like if you go and kill everyone, then I guess people will respond by being scared of you and by maybe wanting to kill you too. And that's part of the reason why Augustus disguised his tyranny under the guise of democracy. To just make it more easily palatable. Like if you're a Roman citizen and maybe you're not a political activist, but maybe you did like the Republic, you know, then you can at least say, the Republic's still here, you know, I don't need to do anything, like it's gonna be fine. The main thing is though, like with Augustus, and what makes him such a lethal politician, like he was probably one of the greatest politicians of his time. The fact is just that he was very, very competent. Because okay, say Augustus came back in and said, oh, the Republic is still here, but actually I'm the emperor and whatever. And then say he had a catastrophic economic policy, or he started a bunch of wars that he couldn't win. This guy wouldn't have survived very long. I mean, that's the fact. Like, the fact is that Augustus' survival wasn't only dependent on his disguise. I mean, his disguise was there, also to kind of facilitate that and to make people like him better. But it was also then very much dependent on whether what he was doing worked, whether he was a good leader. Because if you can guarantee safety and wealth and prosperity for your people, then they'll be much, much easier with swallowing the pill of like, okay, actually we don't get a vote on this anymore.
So here's a question, and sorry to interrupt, but here's a question then. Then does that mean that, I'm asking you this question, would you rather then a flawed democracy or a benevolent dictator? Because if the dictator is competent and benevolent, would we rather live under a system that's safe, or would you want a democracy where we can all have some sort of like ideal of freedom, even if we know it's flawed and needs to be rebuilt every couple of 100 years?
Look, I'm gonna out myself, and you know this, but I'm a pretty staunch democratic proponent. So I'll always say, like, take the democracy, right? But obviously, like, if you look at the last 50 years of the Roman Republic and then the first 50 years of Augustus's reign, one was pretty terrible and the other was pretty okay. So the thing is with tyrannies and dictatorships and like emperorships, like in ancient Rome, they can be fine in the short term. They can be fine for one generation. If you have a good monarch or king or tyrant, then you're going to be okay and things will be fine and maybe you don't need a vote. What we see with Rome and what we see with every single state that focuses in on just one person being in charge, once that person is gone, it's free fall. And it's a dice roll whether the next person is going to be awesome, and smart and cool, or if it's going to be Nero or Caligula, And that's the thing. Like that's what we said. You reap what you sow. Like if you kill every person in the republic that is against you, if you deny the people a vote, if you deny them to be active citizens, then you're going to have people who, when a Nero is in charge, who won't be able to rise up. I mean, yes, there were conspiracies against Nero, but all of them failed. There were conspiracies against Caligula as well. But you won't have a populace that rises up anymore and says, okay, let's take charge, this isn't working. Instead, what you'll have is sheep, I guess. I mean, that's an ugly word to describe people as. But like
sure.
politically speaking, like from like a civic perspective, people who aren't engaged and who won't do anything. So it becomes very easy for a single person who's in charge just to, flush it all down the drain. And I mean, the Roman Empire still persisted. It persisted for a long time afterwards, for a few hundred years. But like the decline was continuous, and people were immensely suffering, always depending on the ruler. And I guess that's the real risk with the tyranny, and that is why the Romans established their republic in the first place. Because they had 7 kings, 6 of them were great, 1 of them was terrible, and that one was enough for them to say, actually,
never again.
Yeah, this isn't worth it. Like the risk just isn't worth it. Even if you get 6 great kings, one of those terrible kings isn't worth it. And then once Augustus established the empire, and once everything was set in stone, they had many of those really terrible kings, and it was always bad. And eventually, the empire just was a swollen bulwark that fell apart like under its own weight.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because bringing it to today. Yeah. Let's zoom forward to today. Okay. It's so fascinating because some of these parallels are just startling because. We think about the armies and how these people take power back in the day. You mentioned like property and standing and like political maneuvering. We see today, and it's kind of instead of armies, we've got wealth. Yeah. We have a consolidated amount of wealth. Yeah. More wealth than we've ever seen before. I mean, we were talking about before. There's people with hundreds of billions of pounds. Like that's not even enough money physically to see. Yeah. It's all in stocks and all these, and it's also in influence. Yeah. So like these ideas of these people, we have Caesars nowadays crossing the Rubicon River through wealth, through influence, through being able to lobby and through being able to give so much money to political campaigns, and just if I give this money, if I just use my influence, my media corporation to prop you up and bit of propaganda here, a bit of fake news here, I can make you the president by just making your campaign better than others. Yeah. So it makes me ask the question then, right? Which is better? We will get into the systems and how terrible both are, and obviously how the influences and how our modern day kind of it's also struggling in his own ways. Yeah. But what do you think is better? Is it better to have a system which can be corrupted through influence, or a system which you need an army to actually make a difference in it?
Ooh, I mean, wow, because ultimately I feel you always if you really want to take over something, you're gonna need an army no matter what. Money is great. And, yes. We've used money for thousands of years as a means to convey value, I guess. But ultimately, you can't kill someone with a $1 bill.
Just throw enough coins at them.
Yeah, exactly. At some point, someone's gonna say no, and someone will be able to resist the money. Yeah. And then you're gonna need soldiers. And that's the thing. In our current system, in many current systems, corruption is possible, and it's in some cases very legal through lobbying and other stuff, and that's bad. Obviously, people exploit this, and people manage to make the lives of other people significantly worse just through paying enough money. And as bad as that is, we have remedies for that. Remedies that actually don't necessitate that all of us pick up arms and throw away our lives on some battlefield, right? Right now, we can still make a difference, and we can still change the ways in which money influences our politics. We can either limit the amounts of money people can have, or we can illegalize, I guess that's the word, stuff like lobbying and campaign donations and all this kinds of stuff. That's the thing about institutions and democracies and whatever. We were talking about how institutions failed in Rome, how the tribunes were exploited or whatever. Yeah, stuff becomes less useful, stuff breaks over time. You can then yourself make the decision of, okay, am I just going to let it break, and am I just going to let it come down to who's got the bigger army? Or maybe we should come up with a new system. Maybe we should come up with new institutions that actually address these issues that we're facing. Every state has weak points. Every state has positions in which one person can accumulate much more power than any other person. Right now, the people who can do that in our society are the people at the top of massive companies who accrue unbelievable amounts of wealth, right? However, this exploits only works for as long as we allow it to work. It will stop working the moment a sufficient amount of people comes together, the moment we reach a critical mass, and the moment we decide, okay, actually that's not how we want to live, because all these systems, they're made by us and they can be changed just as easily. So I would always prefer to live in a society that, I guess, is currently being manipulated, because you can still fix that.
Yes.
Rather than going out on a battlefield and, it's a roll of a dice whether you make it out or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And the winners aren't even the most righteous sometimes on the battlefield. Okay, 2 points on that then. Yeah. First point is that I do agree with you. We have checkpoints and balances to actually help us, make these changes.
Yeah.
But it kind of feels like, just like how it was in Rome, the people that are actually going to make these changes are not incentivized to make these changes because they're in positions of power already. You understand? So the people in power, they're not feeling the same kind of pressing, the need of what the system is actually doing to the people at the bottom. So we might tell them actually we want to vote them out, but it's like, it's that illusion of you got two parties. You pop it on the left, or pop it on the right. Yeah. It's like to get to that level where the change is actually going to be able to help the people at the bottom who are actually struggling. Yeah. There is so much checkpoints you have to go through, so much and you do get sometimes, you get one person who's actually genuinely wants to make change. Yeah. But as we've seen many, many times, the people's champion usually gets maneuvered by the politics at the high level, because when you get to the high level, do those people that are already there for however long, people who've been in that party for so long, do they agree with your politics? Yeah. And it kind of feels to me now that we often get people that are in power only because they kind of carry on the status quo of what came before. Yeah. In some way, shape or form, we talk about this a lot, is that if we have someone truly radical to come in that actually wants to do good, will that person survive? Yeah. Will that person be hated 50% and loved 50%? Would they be able to even make a change? Because to be able to say, I'm 100%, this is what I care about good, and I care about making these changes. You have to be so emotionally resilient and just mentally I don't care about anything else, to actually make that change. So first question is that even possible to have that kind of idea and those kind of people to come in? And then it's on that, after you answer the question, what do you think are some of the biggest weak points in the systems that we have? What do you think, as you see our systems that we have today, are some of the places that you think, we're going to struggle here?
I mean, your question lines up so perfectly with the story of Tiberius Gracchus. I know we're in the present tense now, but it's just so perfectly fitting since we're already talking about Rome. So Tiberius Gracchus wanted to change Rome. He lived, bloody hell! Don't let me forget this. Somewhere in the late second century of Rome. So almost when the Republic started to fall. I think he was active before the Marian reforms. Sorry, I'm always terrible with dates, which makes me terrible. But
first of all, I don't know any of these days. So,
but in any case, Tiberius Gracchus realized there is a problem in Rome. He realized that the people with small properties couldn't compete anymore with the people with large properties, the people with no properties as well, because the large property owners bought more and more land. They could afford more and more land. They had slaves as well, so they didn't have to pay wages. So they would economically push out anyone with smaller properties, and they wouldn't hire some of the propertyless classes to work their land because they had the slaves already, right? So Tiberius Gracchus was like, oh no, this is terrible, because now Roman people can't live Roman lives anymore. Instead, they're being pushed into poverty, and the masses will suffer. Everyone will suffer, other than these very rich, very large landowners. So he wanted to propose a law to limit the amount of land anyone can possess, and to kind of split up the land that large landowners already had, and distribute it again for the Romans. So That was obviously very controversial because the large landowners were the senators, the already very powerful and influential people in politics. And usually like the consuls and the other magistrates in Rome, those were also noblemen. Those were also very wealthy men because I don't think that any of these offices paid a wage. And if you wanted to have a campaign, you had to pay for it yourself. So you had to be very wealthy to do this in the first place, right? So Tiberius wanted to push this through. Tiberius then became a tribune to do that. Everybody hated it. Everybody like in power was like, F this guy, he's the worst. Let's stop him. They tried all kinds of stuff. They tried to bribe other tribunes who were in office at the same time to veto him. But Tiberius somehow always managed to come out on top and like beat these guys out. Like I think there was one guy who vetoed him, and then Tiberius had him voted out of office by the assembly. That was how like much the people were behind him and how popular his proposition was. Then he finally passed this bill, the land redistribution bill, and okay, so this is where it gets kind of dicey because now you could either say, okay, he achieved his goal, wash your hands and go home, bro. Like like this is well done, happy story, good story about like social change. But Tiberius was of the opinion that this was so controversial among all the powerful people in Rome that he didn't think that his law would make it very far. He thought people would try to repeal it, try to like write another law to kind of like counteract this. So he decided that he wanted to stay in office for another term. So he wanted to be re-elected, which in Rome was like a big faux pas. Like they didn't have re-elections. Like if you wanted to be consul again, I mean, I guess that was possible, but you would wait a few years. Like you don't get an immediate second term because that just wasn't how things were done. It wasn't illegal though, but like it was like it was like on the edge, right? So he wanted to be re-elected. He sought re-election. The people were willing to re-elect him, but the senators were so outraged and so upset. Maybe they were upset because they thought it was unconstitutional to be elected twice. Maybe they were upset because they genuinely wanted to repeal that law and didn't want him to be in power anymore. So they banded together, broke off a bunch of wooden chair legs, and killed him. Like they literally came in a crowd onto Capitol Hill where the election was held and clubbed him to death. So you were...
That's insane.
It's insane, right?
Like what? Can you imagine people in a parliament just taking chairs and beating someone to death? You're supposed to be like...
I mean,
sorry.
I guess to their credit, they tried first to go to the consul and have the consul to like arrest him. But when the consul didn't arrest him, they decided to take things into their own hand. Yes, MPs, I guess, literally MPs going out and killing someone. Which like is crazy. And it's kind of like, it goes into your point of like, okay, radical people trying to make radical change will face so much opposition.
Absolutely.
Almost like literally to the bitter end, right? The thing is though, all the powerful people who are incentivized to like keep things as they are, all the powerful people for the thing, who are, for whom the system is working, they're very few. I mean, even though the senators were enough to kill Tiberius, like the senators are not enough to kill every single lower class citizen in Rome, especially since that was the by far largest demographic, right? And yeah, sure, I mean, I guess they were technically in control of the armies, but then again, after the Marian reforms, a lot of lower class citizens were part of the army. So the thing is, when a group bands together, a group of a common interest, even if they're propertyless, even if they're lower class, if the group is sufficiently large enough, they can have safety in numbers and they can topple entire regimes. It has happened over and over again. It's happened in France, it happened in a lot of Middle Eastern Arabian countries during the Arabic Spring, I guess that's what it was called. If enough people band together, they can topple anything because systems of governance they don't really exist. They only exist in people's heads and they only exist on like black and white pages.
Absolutely.
So none of this is written in stone. None of this is divine law that is enforced by like some cosmic power.
Yeah. It doesn't go against physics to just change it. You can't just make a difference. Yeah.
Like if you don't participate in the system and if the majority of people don't decide not to participate in something, then it doesn't exist anymore.
But see, like there's a tension with that too because you are right.
Yeah.
If you don't participate in the corruption, then you can maybe kind of find a way to just turn it good again.
Yeah.
But it seems to me like these kind of seems that they're woefully making us like ambivalent or less motivated to pay attention in politics, because so much stuff is happening, and you see like it's a record like number of people not voting, a record number of people just being disassociated with politics, and then you see in that there's a saying like the price good men pay for not being involved in things to be ruled by evil men. It's like it kind of feels like if you choose not to do it, what they will do is that they'll give them more reason to actually keep passing these laws, because you don't care anyway, then I'm going to do whatever I want. So there's that tension of but then you are right also, because these systems, they're just ideas, and they're just ideas in people's head. They're held together by the participation of people, by people participating and actually making a difference.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point of okay, people are kind of disincentivized from participating anyways, and if everybody doesn't participate, okay, but if everybody then just stays home in their beds, then nothing's going to change anyways. And I guess that's the point where it comes to, okay, it's not enough to just not participate. You have to organize. You have to come together as groups, as a people, as an entire populace to change something, to make something better. And I'm not even saying through votes. I mean, you got me your camera, you're saying all this stuff, but
I'm here too, so if they're coming for us, they're coming for both of us.
If the system is broken, then you can't look within the system for a solution. You have to, if
absolutely, you're right.
If you organize and stuff.
Yeah, you have to create new systems.
Yeah, your goal can't be to win an election or to get enough votes together. Your goal has to be, I'm going to bring enough people so that we can make a new election. So again, we can make a new system, a new institution that'll have to be recognized because just so many people want it, right? And anybody can do this. You don't need to go to your local council or whatever. You don't need to go vote or get a degree or whatever. You just need to get a bunch of people together in your basement.
Absolutely.
Or maybe somewhere else than your basement, because
it's always in your basement. They're gonna know. Yeah, indeed, the revolution will be televised on a podcast.
To be clear, I'm not really talking about revolution, more like reform from the bottom up.
Reform from the bottom up.
You don't need to behead anyone. Okay, no violence.
No violence. Okay, so let's wrap it up. I'm fascinated by how, and I think the name of the episode was "How Do Empires Fall." So we looked at Rome, and I think you made so many good points about Rome fell. And I think the crux of the issue is that they fell from within. It was the systems and how they reacted to within, and obviously extraneous stuff, but also how Rome reacted to those things that made it fall. We're looking at our current empire, looking at our current situation. Are we suffering from the same thing? Is it a thing where empires have to fall from within to fall from without? It's are we at a stage where our inability to get along, our inability to, stamp out corruption, our kind of the disparaging gap and ever-growing gap of wealth distribution of these people being so rich that they kind of oppress the poor in just through influence and making decisions and think they can rule the poor through just I know what's good for you. Is that kind of mentality, is that what's actually going to crumble our empire from within?
I mean, look, history has shown time and time again that nothing is written in stone, right? Sulla came in and Sulla left suddenly. Like Sulla came in, killed everyone, declared himself dictator, and then he left, which no one could have predicted. Caesar came in, won everything against everyone, held all the powers, and then got shanked by his best friends and his son. Then Augustus and Mark Antony come in, and Augustus, Octavian, was like an 18-year-old kid with no influence, and Mark Antony was an experienced general with all kinds of influence and power and money, and Octavian won. So I guess I just want to first of all kind of put into question, okay, people talk about our decline or rotting from the inside, and yes, there's so many issues that we're currently facing, issues that are getting worse. That doesn't have to put us on a path of constant decline, though, or on a rot, or us crumbling from the inside and then falling from the outside. A lot of people like to think that way, but actually, there's no such thing as a predetermined fate. At least when it comes to statecraft, right? I mean, maybe you might want to believe in that on a spiritual level, but look at history and look at how many left turns things have taken.
Absolutely.
And it's very easy to nowadays look back and think, oh, of course, everything turned out the way it did, because of course we have all this evidence and all this stuff, but that is reading history backwards, essentially. You're putting cause before effect, and you're putting effect before cause, and you're kind of trying to make everything fit into a narrative, when really a bunch of shit is just random. You know, a bunch of shit just happens because someone wasn't 100% there that day, someone was a little tired, so like they made a mistake, and other shit happens and whatever. So like, what I want to say, I guess, is that it isn't too late for us. Even though we face that many issues, stuff can always change and stuff will always change. Though, what you have said about like the issues that we're facing, of course, they're disturbingly similar to a lot of issues that the Romans were facing.
Feels like it always happens that way, doesn't it?
Exactly. Like, you know, George Lucas said history rhymes, and, you know, like, that guy only wrote Star Wars, but I guess in that point he's right. You know, like, it is, I think what these issues that we're facing should do, what the ideal case would be, is that they wake up enough people to stop just relying on some faceless politician to somehow fix all the issues for you, but for you to actually go out on the street and do something.
Absolutely.
Right? And you can do something. It doesn't have to be sitting in bed scrolling on TikTok or weaponized revolution storming your government buildings, right? There is a middle ground there, which you can engage in right now without doing anything like illegal or harmful or whatever. You can organize, you can try to create new institutions, and I don't think that are like rotting from the inside or crumbling from the inside. I don't think that's predetermined. Equally though, I mean, if you want to see the parallels between ancient Rome and now, they are absolutely there. And for as long as democracy exists, there will always be these types of issues popping up. At least until we find like some other really amazing system of governance that somehow combines freedom and democracy and equality with like absolute stability. But I guess my point is that things aren't hopeless. I
agree. I mean, first of all, on your point about finding a new system, it's been thousands of years. I don't think we're getting closer to finding a new system. But I do think, you know, I think a lot of what you said, I want to echo. It's like, it's about active participation in the democracy. You know, these democracies, they crumble from within when the people that are in it stop believing in it, when they stop taking responsibility for it, when they give their power and responsibility to these strong men, these ideas of these people who are like, you know, like bravado when they go all these and no, let them decide. But they're also people, and like they also got their own hidden motivations and stuff like that. And so it's like really important for us to recognize that, hey, we have that ability to participate in it because we have our free will, you know, inalienable rights and all that shabazz. But it's also like the idea that, you know, like, I also think there's a collective memory in humankind. There's a collective memory in cultures too, you know, that over time we start to feel that things are getting away from us because we all live here too. We start to feel like actually we need to make a difference. And maybe it's a kind of a cycle where it's like we become too comfortable until we actually have to make a difference, and then we do, and you know, good always wins in the end or some Star Wars shit, you know. But we do have to make that choice, and we do have to kind of like make history rhyme. It has to rhyme because we have to make that choice to make it rhyme. And so like these conversations, that's why I love them, because they present an idea that I like, you know, like let's keep this in our mind. You know, like studying history, I've learned, is the best way to know what to do in the present because it just wakes you up. It keeps waking you up. We've talked today about all of these things. It means that you can see what's coming. You know, if you know where you've been, you know where you're going.
Exactly.
And if you understand that, then you can have the choice. Then you have the responsibility to make a choice to be like, actually, maybe I'm okay, or maybe I know how to steer this ship a bit better, you know?
And I mean, one point, I guess, without wanting to drag things out.
No, take your time.
But because you put on this point about strongmen, which I think is really important, because we were talking about like, you know, getting up and doing something and not being apathetic. I want to make clear, however, that as great as I think this participation is, it can also be misled. Because some people decide, I want to get up and do something, and then they suddenly think, okay, the only thing that I know that I suddenly come up with is taking a baseball bat and trashing everything, or writing death threats to politicians, or you know, doing all these terrible things in the name of change, because you feel things have gotten out of control, and suddenly you feel it's justified, right? that's not what I'm talking about when I say participation, and that's not what I'm talking about when I say building new institution. Following a single person who can tell you that everything's going to be all right if you put me in charge will never ever make things better, and doing harmful things in the name of that person won't make you a better person. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. When it comes to being an engaged citizen and organizing, and we have countless examples of this, though those examples are like less well known, because it's better to tell a story about a single man than to tell a story about a movement or an idea. But we have unions that came together, banding together against exploitation during the industrialization. People who didn't bandy together around one single person and say, hey, we follow him. People who bandied together and followed an idea instead of a person.
Civil rights movements, all of these things.
Civil rights movement, exactly.
Emancipation of women, all these things, we realize it's a culture.
And I mean, that's 100% it. Like, because civil rights movements, they had their leaders, they had their figures that were like, inspiring, and some of them found like terrible ends. We were talking about Martin Luther King the other day. And that's terrible, obviously. But those movements persisted because they weren't dependent on one person like Martin Luther King to move on. They persisted because the ideas at the center of those movements spoke to a mass of people who kept fighting, even if the leader died, even if everybody else died. See, that's the great thing about like building something that is meant to help everyone, because you can kill as many people as you want, those ideas will persist, and those ideas, like, people will keep fighting for them. If you kill the leader of a strongman movement, that movement will dissipate. They will try to find another strongman, but like the ideas will be different, everything will be different. But you can't kill an idea, I guess.
100%, I completely agree with it. I think on it and there, it's like you can't kill an idea. I think the movement we've seen in the past, and even today, you see some movements kind of making that progress, because I think that's what human beings, and I think that's what essentially culture can be simplified to just like kind of movement, help people, help as much people as possible. And there's always that striving to help people. That's the most important, and we can sit here and look at history and say, okay, how do we learn from it? But all matters is today. It's like today, Rome is gone. I mean, there's still Rome somewhere, but the idea of Rome is gone, where the empire is gone. What we have is today. And like I always say, like, pay attention. Like you might not be able to do anything now. I can't do anything now. I can sit in this room with this beautiful guy, kind of talk about these ideas, but pay attention. Are you paying attention? Because I think that's how they get you. When you stop paying attention to the systems, when you stop paying attention to people suffering, you stop paying attention to the way the suffering is being done, that's when these things have a way of just, kind of running away from you. But yeah, like you're right. Like these ideas will keep coming. The ideas will keep taking people and inspiring people. So we should just allow it to happen, Yeah. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you. Right. There we go.
I appreciate you so much. I think these conversations, I want to keep doing them. They're so one of my favorites of this, series. I love talking to you. Your brain is amazing. You have the ability to just kind of rattle off these ideas and you rattle off these ideas and just, have such poignant observations about them that's truly, because I know your heart is pure and I know your heart is good, so you really do care about these things.
My observations are only poignant because the questions are so poignant,
We're both great then.
We're both amazing.
We're both amazing. How about that? We can stop there. We're both amazing. That's what we've learned. Not about Rome, not about empires. We're both amazing. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Until next time, guys. Peace.